Well, it's Daily Wisdom from Proverbs, and today we're in chapter 13. Before we get into the meat of this passage, I want to talk about four people that we see in the book of Proverbs, four types of people, and they're called by certain names. The first one is referred to, and we looked at this the very first day. It's the people who are called the simple. Now, the simple are the people who don't know any better. They need education. They need wisdom. They need understanding. They're not sure what to do, and they're kind of drifting along through life. We're all simple at times. We all need direction. We all need guidance. We all need wisdom. That's why I'm doing this, because I need to be more wise. I pray that's why you're watching these, because you want to be more wise. You want to seek wisdom. So there's the simple. The second person we see is a person called the fool. Now, the fool is a little different than the simple. The simple doesn't know any better, and they make bad decisions and wrong choices because they just don't know any better. They need guidance. The fool's a different story. The fool has been told, he knows right from wrong. He knows the right thing to do, and yet they choose to do the wrong thing anyway. Why? Well, because they think it's right in their own mind, or because it's easier, or because wisdom is harder sometimes, or because they just want what they want. And they put wisdom to the side intentionally and say, no, I'm going to do this instead. And usually the actions of fools is called, we learned this the other day, folly. The third type of person we hear about in the book of Proverbs is someone called the mocker or the scoffer. Now, the mocker or the scoffer is a step worse than the fool. While the fool puts aside wisdom and they do their own thing anyway, the mocker says wisdom is the wrong thing to do. The mocker says that wisdom will lead you in the wrong direction, and they actually scoff at wisdom and mock at wisdom. Now, the fourth type of person in Proverbs is the wise. So we see them called the wise and the prudent. And there's a lot of contrasting verses. And in chapter 13 today, almost every verse, except for one, is one of those opposite contrasting type verses. And we will pause when we get to the one that's not. So starting in verse 1, a wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. From the fruit of his mouth, a man eats what is good, but the desire of the treacherous is for violence. Verse 3, whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. You know what that means, to open wide your lips? That means I'll say whatever I want to say, whenever I want to say it, and nobody can tell me to shut up, and I'll just, say whatever's on my mind. That's he who opens wide his lips. And it says that person comes to ruin. Verse 4, the soul of the sluggard, the lazy person, the person who's not industrious, that person's soul craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Verse 5, the righteous hates falsehood, but the wicked brings shame and disgrace. Verse 6, righteousness guards him whose way is blameless, but sin overthrows the wicked. Verse 7, one pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. Verse 8 says, the ransom of a man's life is his wealth, but a poor man hears no threat. Verse 9 says, the light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked will be put out. By insolence comes nothing but strife, but with those who take advice is wisdom. Verse 11 says that wealth that is gained hastily will dwindle. Haven't we all seen that at times in our lives? But whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Verse 12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Isn't that true? Haven't there been times in our lives when we just felt like there was no hope and it just keeps getting put off and put off and put off, no matter what the situation was, whether it's a financial situation in your life or a medical situation or a relationship issue or whatever the case was, and your hope gets deferred and deferred and deferred and deferred. It just makes your heart sick. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. Verse 13, let's pause at this one for a minute. Whoever despises the word of wisdom, the word of God, the Bible, wise words that people try to speak into their lives. Whoever despises the word brings destruction on himself. We're talking about the mocker there, the scoffer, the person who hears the word and just says, well, this is just nonsense. They see wisdom as foolishness. Whoever despises the word brings destruction on himself, but he who reveres the commandment will be rewarded. And verse 14, the only verse in chapter 13 that is not an opposite, contrasting type of a verse. Look at it closely with me. The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life. Solomon wrote these words from Proverbs chapter 13 3,000 years ago. And yet, we're still reading it today. We still read the Bible today, even though it's a book of antiquity, because it's still applicable today. It is a fountain of life. Wisdom is a fountain of life. And this verse amplifies that in the second half. It says, the teaching of the wise is a fountain of life. Why? That one may turn away from the snares of death. The way of folly, the way of foolishness, seems good at the moment, but really it's the snares of death. Let's continue on. Verse 15. Good sense wins favor, but the way of the treacherous is their ruin. Verse 16, and everything the prudent acts with what? Knowledge. But a fool flaunts his folly. We know people like this too. Sometimes we are people like this. We're fools who not only do foolish things, but we flaunt our folly. We post it up on our social media so everybody else can see it. We brag about it to our coworkers and our friends. We make sure everybody else knows what we've been doing. We flaunt our folly. That's what fools do. Verse 17, a wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a faithful envoy brings healing. Verse 18 says, poverty and disgrace come to him who ignores instruction. We've heard that many times through Proverbs. But whoever heeds reproof is honored. A desire fulfilled is sweet to the soul, but to turn away from evil is an abomination to who? To fools. Fools hate to turn away from evil. Verse 20 says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise. That's why it's important to spend time with wise people. That's why it's important to spend time with people who know and act out God's word, who are filled with the Spirit. When you walk with the wise, you become wise as well. However, flip side of that coin, second half of verse 20, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Verse 21 says, disaster pursues sinners. Don't we all know that very well? But the righteous are rewarded with good. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. Verse 23, the fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it's swept away through injustice. Verse 24, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him, who loves his son, is diligent to discipline him. And finally, verse 25, the righteous has enough to satisfy his appetite, but the belly of the wicked suffers want. Well, that's a healthy dose of wisdom from Proverbs chapter 13, and I pray you'll join us tomorrow as we continue with daily wisdom from Proverbs. God bless you.